What do you think about commercial development here in town?
I don't actually think much about it because we don't actually get much, do we?
Yes, in general, commercial development tends to sound a little bit more like larger businesses or like kind of strip mall style development, which doesn't really fit in with Concord as much, I would say. But I know that it's also a broader term, so it could be smaller stuff too.
In Concord, properly done, it's paramount for the town. It does have to be properly done. The apartments behind here are an example of part of what the West Concord Village needed for revitalization. And the mill buildings that John Boynton did, reviving those, was fabulous.
I think you want some, but not too much. So I think, West Concord have, a decent amount. It serves the purpose. We could use a bit more, as she says, a bit more diversity in terms of the offerings here. I'd like to see a few.
On the other side.
A few more. We'd like restaurants. Not having a bakery on the other side too. I mean, Neshoba's great, but it'd be great to have that. A little bit more fresh goods. But Concord has a certain, je ne sais quoi about it, and we don't want too much commercial development. We can go elsewhere for that. I think it's you want just enough.
Yeah, keep it rural, keep farmland going.
I would hate to see this lovely downtown area changed, and also downtown over there.
Like offices, business offices, and like stores, shops, and like some kind of like car services. This is like what's coming in my mind.
Do you think Concord needs more commercial development, less, or keep the same?
I think like currently is like nice balance. I think we should be like picky what kind of commercial development we are doing, especially if we like bring in like gambling casino or like something like this. It might be negatively impact our community. I think we need to be like careful like what we are bringing to Concord.
Where I live, commercial development is kind of a dirty word.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Mary Hartman. I'm the chair of the Select Board. I want to welcome you and thank you for spending your Wednesday evening with us. I'm going to make a few introductory remarks and then I will turn it over to Mike Lawson, who will be our facilitator. During my 8 years of involvement in town government, first when I was on the Finance Committee and then in the Select Board, there's been some voices interested in commercial development. At first, the voices I thought were faint and they were mostly from the business community. But then, first of all, I think when we got the new middle school and we saw the impact on our property tax bill, that kind of amplified some of the interest in commercial development to help us mitigate the impact on our property tax bill. And then, of course, when we got the MCI opportunity for the land there, the 2229 Main Street property that we may decide to go forward with, we've got quite a bit of land available to us. So again, that amplified our interest in commercial development. So for some people, the idea of commercial development is very promising. Not only does it help with our property taxes, but it also will bring into town services that we need. We need restaurants. We need health and wellness facilities. I think we need a hotel. We need sports facilities. Maybe we need more clean energy businesses. So the good thing about commercial development is that it brings services in that we need. But some people in town are skeptical of commercial development. They see it as a threat to the character of the town. They think the town should have other priorities, open space, historic preservation, and housing for just a few. So we've got a tension. So we've got to figure out what is the right scope, scale, and type of commercial development that's right for Concord. So that's what we're doing here tonight. We're starting to have that conversation so that we can get a better feel for what type of commercial development and what do we mean by commercial development within Concord. So we've got a great panel. I'm going to turn it over to Mike Lawson, who's going to be our moderator for tonight. And again, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Mary.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Mike Lawson. I live at 1695 Lowell Road, and I'm chair of the Economic Vitality Committee. I'm delighted to welcome everybody here this evening. Before we introduce the panel and get on with this, I'm going to show you just a few quick slides, only to provide some facts about the town and how commercial development fits into the overall structure. So Mimi, could you start us off? So what does commercial development mean? All right, here's Concord at a glance. You can see some facts about the town, unless you're sitting up here in the panel and probably overwhelmed by it. Median income, quite higher than the regional average. Education, half of our folks, could you go to, there you go, graduates, professional degrees. Self-employment at 18%, twice the mass average and 3 times the US average. And the kind of businesses that dominate our landscape are professional businesses, medical businesses, and education. Next slide, please. Here's the map that you won't be able to see, but the headers are pretty clear. Commercial footprint, just 3% of Concord's total land area is zoned for commercial use. And so really quite limited. Commercial contributions to municipal revenue, again, 3% of our overall budget. Next slide. Commercial contributes to municipal revenue 6.8%. So you can see the bar charts to my far left, and you can see the commercial is that little yellowy orangey stripe at the very top. And the next slide indicates that the property tax levy contributes to the overall municipal budget. And then this last slide just showing that there hasn't really been much growth in commercial development over the last number of years. So just some quick facts, and then if you can just go to the header slide, we'll leave it there. Thank you. And so what we're going to do tonight, the format that I'm going to use, I'll first introduce the panel. I have a question that I'd like to ask the entire panel and get everybody a chance to comment on it. Then I have a set of questions that are aimed at the individual panelists. And then finally, I'll come back with, again, a question aimed at everyone, and then we'll turn it over to questions from the audience. So that's the plan. So first, let me introduce John Boynton. John is a member of the MCI Concord Advisory Board and owner of Firehouse Capital, an investment company focused on entrepreneurship ventures and known, among other things, for the Bradford Mill in West Concord. Quentin Hart. Quentin is a partner at McCord, a real estate development and management company. He leads the Boston office in managing investing in office and industrial use. Next, Jen McCord. Jen is a longtime Concord resident and the owner of Joy Street Life and Home, which we've all been in. Jen brings a deep understanding of Concord's retail landscape, and she was a former member of the Economic Vitality Committee, which we were sorry to see her go. And last, Paul Rodriguez is the lead financial consultant for Avery Harper Solutions, which I learned tonight is his company named after his daughters, who are Avery and Harper. Very good. I'm glad you're paying attention. Paul's on the Finance Committee, and we all know the Finance Committee is that committee that advises town meeting on financial matters, including budget guidelines. So that's our panel. I'd really greatly, first of all, thank you all for agreeing to be here this evening and to help us with this. So here's my first question. When you think about commercial development, what does it mean for Concord? And what kind of commercial development do you think Concord wants? Volunteers, John? Start us off. Thank you. Please do.
Okay, is that on? Good. First of all, I want to thank Mike, Mary, and the EVC, Mimi, for putting this on, because I think this is an extremely important discussion. It's something that we haven't talked about nearly enough in Concord, so delighted to be here, and I hope this is just the beginning of a long conversation across the community, because I think this is a really important opportunity for the town. When I think about commercial development, I think that's really about growth. And that's not something that Concord has a lot of experience with. I went back and looked at the growth in population in Concord over the last 55 or 60 years. In 1970, we had 17,000 residents. We crossed we had 16,000 residents. 30 years later, we had 17,000 residents. And in 2023, we had just crossed over 18,000 residents. So our population has grown at about 0.2% over the last 50 years. At the same time, the town's operating budget has grown considerably. And if you look at the next 5 years, Paul can speak more to this, but my understanding is that we're looking at annual increases in excess of 6, 7, 8% on the horizon. So the bottom line is that unless we are going to, if we have any chance of keeping Concord semi-affordable, and I'm not arguing that it is affordable, but if we want to keep Concord affordable, really the only way to do that without putting an increased burden on residences is to increase the amount of commercial property in town. So that means commercial development, and again, I think that's really the best way for us to continue to achieve what we want to as a town without intensifying the burden on taxpayers.
And what kind of commercial development do you think Concord wants?
That's a great question. I think that I served on the Long Range Plan Committee that created the Envision Concord 2030 plan. And we spent a lot of time talking to residents about priorities. And if you go back and look at that plan, I think there's actually a lot in there that informs this discussion. There was a strong appreciation for town centers. When we get to MCI Concord, I think there's an opportunity to create something not unlike a new town center there, which would be pretty cool. There was a recognition that we have these independent businesses. We want to support them. That's going to be important. But the single most important theme that I recall from the survey work we did at Envision Concord was that people want to remain true to the town's character. Right? We have this deep commitment to Concord and this notion of its character. And so in terms of what kind of development would be good for us, we need to be sure that it's in line with our values and our character. Now, exactly what that's going to mean, it's hard to say, because the reality is that when you create opportunities for commercial development, you don't have full control over what the uses might be, right? Yeah. My wife and I, we own 2428 Walden Street, which is where Fiorella's is. Now, when Walden Grill went out of business years ago, we had this amazing vision for the kind of restaurant we wanted to see there. It was going to be family friendly, it was going to have ice cream, it was going to be casual, it was going to be affordable. It turned out there were no restaurant operators who wanted to operate a restaurant like that. So at the end of the day, we had to go with a company, with a restaurant called Bondier, which was nothing like we imagined. So we can create the conditions for the kind of development we want to see, but ultimately we're going to have to make it attractive for those businesses to come into town.
Thank you very much, John. Paul, would you like to go next?
Absolutely. So as we discussed, I was given the opportunity to look forward at some of the revenue requirements that we will need as a town to maintain the steady state and the steady deliverance of services, both from the educational as well as from the town perspective. And in order to do that, we rely very heavily on residential taxes. In fact, as we saw in the slide behind just a few minutes ago, that it's nearly completely residential. But the issue associated with residential taxes is the more that they increase in one of two different ways. There is more residential property, or we increase the cost per $1,000 of assessed value. Either the first one, if you look towards just building more residences, that also adds to the level of service requirements across the board for not only the town, but also for the schools. So the key to that from a finance committee perspective is having a good amount or a good mix of commercial real estate and commercial property to add to the mix that doesn't necessarily require as much requirements in town and school services, but does contribute to the overall town budget. So I'm not the expert associated with knowing exactly what the town wants, but I do know, and we've heard plenty from various residents, that the idea of continuous increases of real estate taxes in order to meet the bill that's coming due is not what we all want. And we have to find ways to work around that. And thank you for inviting me to this forum, because I'd love to continue to go down that rabbit hole to find the ways that we can solve this problem.
Thank you, Paul. Quentin?
Yeah, I agree. There are two perspectives here on commercial growth. I think Concord does want commercial growth. The first is this pragmatic approach that Paul just spoke to, which is that we need long-term durability on our revenue source. We like parks, we like good schools, we like town services, and we need to finance those things. And I think the point Paul just made about what services those uses require is really important, looking at the infrastructure that's required for them, but also the tax density of those uses, and sort of aligning that with, at the end of the day, there's certain things that work and other things that don't work. To John's comment about the restaurant, we can't just want it and have it here. It has to make sense for our community. And the second perspective is our quality of life, the real estate for what it is. And I do think that people value the cultural vibrancy of our three town centers and are willing to see the town extend on those and be true to the heritage there, but to have more services, more shopping options, more ways of eliminating Amazon packages from their front door by replacing that with local conveniences. And just to find that balance between the moderate way to do that is thoughtful.
Okay, thank you. Jen?
Thanks. Yes, hi. So I'm going to be on a much more granular level because that's kind of where I am on Com Ave. So I've lived here for 24 years in West Concord, always walkable to the center. I would say that the people that live here love the walkability of it, and visitors love that it's walkable. I believe there are certain things that people that live here would like. It's going to sound silly, but a brewery. That's been something that's been wanted in West Concord for years, just a local meeting place. And oh, sorry about that. Can you hear me okay? So I would say certain things like a brewery, definitely more retail. I think we will draw more people year-round if we have a wider variety of stores, like some more stores, but also not just bringing in the same type of store that's competing with each other. I mean, we're obviously competing with each other, but something that brings a different variety. So I have more on some of the challenges, but I would really more say that's.
Jen, do you have a thought of the kind of development that you think Concord would want to have? Some of the other panelists have kind of commented on that.
Right. I definitely think the MCI, buying that could be so many opportunities that would not only provide bigger businesses, smaller businesses, perhaps a hotel, but I would say it will give more parking. But I definitely just think the types of businesses, it'd be some small restaurants, gift shops that are walkable.
Okay, thank you. So the first question I will have is for Quentin. Quentin, what trends in commercial real estate do you think Concord should prepare for in the next decade?
10 years is a long time, and I don't have a crystal ball, but I did think about this. And one important trend, I think, is what I call the evolution of industrial with respect to real estate. And I think that industrial, as it pertains to physical property, has become a bit of a dirty or unwanted word. And that's because there's been industrial. We have firsthand experience that has polluted the earth and the sky. And more recently, industrial is kind of connected to large warehouses that don't bring much tax base, not many jobs, and lots of traffic. But the reality is, I think we've entered an era in which we can kind of reconnect to the original spirit of industry, which is actually very true to Concord, from the original sawmills and textile mills to furniture and saddle manufacturing, ski boot bindings. It's very interesting in that we are, and we showed the fact 2 or 3 times the national or regional average as far as self-employment. This is a town of professionals, but also makers and innovators. And that tradition of enterprising people continues today. It's not well known, but there are a lot of companies quietly executing on solving the world's leading problems. We have businesses that are converting food and trash waste into clean energy, firms that are making life-saving and life-altering medical devices, companies making industrial technology, and clean energy companies, all in Concord. This is happening like global companies, publicly traded companies. But the important thing is that this new wave of industrial is fundamentally different from the bad things we think about. This is clean activities, high-tech stuff happening in extraordinarily dense, tax-rich buildings that are effectively, in many cases, cleaner than our own homes and are not noxious, and they're exciting because they're contributing to the next wave of innovation. They create jobs, and many of them will not have disproportionate resources on the town. The second major trend I see is what in the industry we call new urbanism, which is a fancy word for the in-between of city and suburbs. It's moderate density, it's walkable environments, it's mixed use, it's deprioritizing the car and prioritizing the pedestrian. And we're already doing this. We're investing in parks and trails. We've got new crosswalks downtown that enhance safety and comfort. But I think we're going to see a much more intentional trend to new urbanism or moderate density. And it's probably going to be one that we ought to embrace a little bit more formally to achieve some of these commercial development goals. There's obviously a lot of others. Mixed income and housing across income levels is super important. Multi-generational housing or housing that serves all age groups is super important. Figuring out what electrification of the new stretch energy code means for our grid here in town and how that's going to work is very important. But I think there's a lot of exciting opportunities in these trends that make sense. And then finally, life sciences is the big story of this last cycle in commercial real estate. It's enormous in our peers, Bedford and Lexington. It's not so enormous here, yet we have the hospital here. Personalized medicine is a thing. It's coming. It's going to make sense for there to be R&D close to the centers of treatment. And we probably have an opportunity for life sciences, biotechnology, safe, exciting R&D here in Concord as well.
Thank you. Anybody else want to comment on that question? Don't need to, but just asking. No? John, did you?
I'll just address one dimension of what you said, which is this notion of development bringing additional space and uses that does not require an increase in town services, is I think really important to us. It's been a battle over the last 25 years for us to rebuild 3 elementary schools, the middle schools, a high school. And those schools are basically right about at capacity. I think one of them might be a little below, but we absolutely want to see Concord stay more affordable. We talk a lot about creating more affordable, diverse housing stock. But I think we have to be really careful to look at the I guess like, the full systems cost of what development costs, right? So Gwen, you kind of referenced, clean, sustainable, non-polluting. That I think is obviously critical. But also I think we need to look at, if we do create more commercial space and it's going to be developed for certain purposes, let's make sure we understand what the life safety services might be for that, what the school impact might be for that. If we create a lot of housing and we bring in, 500 more kids, well, we're going to find ourselves building more schools pretty darn fast. So we need to make sure that we're thinking holistically about the impact of anything we do going forward.
For sure, that's an important point. Thank you. Let me ask a question of Jen. Jen, you have a business in town. What are the biggest challenges you face operating in Concord? And how do town policies impact your ability to be successful?
So I would say it really depends on the type of business. My business itself is not as complex. We have one bathroom that just the 4 employees use. We have parking spots. Parking would always be great, but I think the more complex your business gets, particularly if you're getting into the grocery store or the restaurant, brewery, that becomes way more complex with the town. And in speaking with some of my friends that are owners of stores, I would say that there's that concern of having to pay, I guess it's to get more water, it's creating the sewer or more sewer, that is very expensive. And not only can it be tens of thousands of dollars for anyone that already existed, but to come into this town to start a new business and potentially have, let's say, a $50,000 bill before you even open, that is prohibitive to a lot of small retailers. But one thing I would say, absolutely, one of the greatest challenges is parking. Parking. And I believe this is throughout definitely Concord Center too. So it is very hard to find enough parking during the day, during the weekends. There seems that it would be nice if we could build some sort of, in the fashion of a small town, that the architecture fits in with a small town, but can we add another level over by the West Concord train station stop, but do it in a way that fits with the look and feel of the town. I would say from a West Concord standpoint, it would be wonderful if we could figure out a way to get some or many of the out-of-town visitors that come to Concord Center. But I don't think we can just say, oh, let's get a bus and bring them over. I think one thing is we have to make it compelling. And there is history in West Concord that some people have been bringing more to life and doing a walking tour. But I feel that there's 2 things. If you can bring to life the history of West Concord, continue to make the West Concord have feel somewhat to Concord Center, but a warm, welcoming, small town feel, I think that will be more interesting. And then another way to get them over, back and forth, from Concord Center to West Concord. That would be something that's great. For me, I had only been open a couple years when COVID hit. So for me, it was an incredible challenge. However, the benefit that I had is I don't have hardly any out-of-town visitors. We get virtually no one. It is all people that live in the area and maybe come from Acton, Maynard, Harvard, a bit. So when everybody had to come home and nobody was going to work, I actually had more demand for my store because people still wanted cards and gifts, and I just had this built-in place. There was nowhere else they could go. However, Concord Center, if a significant portion of your business was dependent on out-of-town visitors coming, that was a bigger challenge because they weren't coming. So I would just say that's the difference. It'd be nicer if I had a little bit more of that challenge by having out-of-town visitors come. As far as other challenges, I don't have this challenge right now. I have talked to a number of people in West Concord and other businesses that rents, high rents have been a challenge. I am fortunate right now that I have a landlord that seems very fair, is very helpful. So I haven't run into that challenge. Another thing that people have said is, could we please put signs up for where the public parking is in West Concord? That's a challenge, so people know where they can actually park, because I think a lot of people, from what I understand, give up quickly when they don't see on that main drag come out.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Anybody else want to comment on that?
I'll just make a comment. What Jen mentioned about water and sewer, I think is going to be a really important challenge that we're going to have to meet head on, because the impact fees are just one part of it. My understanding, which may not be 100% accurate, is that regardless of any impact fee collection, we have a limited discharge allowed in this town right now. And even with the MCI discharge amount, which is not very big, even if we buy that or get it for $1, it doesn't solve all of our problems. We need to put the sewer somewhere. And any commercial development, we can hope that some of it will work on septic, but most of it will not. And so that is a challenge that we are going to have to address head on at some point. It's going to require cost and expense and problem solving, and it's going to be all the more important that that tax base align with that to solve that problem.
Great, good point. And yeah, Paul, please.
I also like to look at it in the form of like an optimistic view of there are challenges. You know, we just named a few: parking, water, sewer. But I think as a community, we could come together to meet those challenges and find solutions to the challenges that enable us to kind of reap the benefits from a personal standpoint of not having to go to neighboring towns to do our shopping, to also, you know, not having to rely on only property tax to fund the town and schools. But the big thing that I would love to see is having those conversations and developing a plan to meet the challenges as they develop, identify them, and then continue to move forward.
Right, John?
Yeah, let's address one aspect of what you said. You're absolutely right, Quentin. The wastewater treatment is a big problem. It's a constraint on us right now. I think that our current plant has something like 1.2 million gallons a day of capacity. We actually have 1.1 million under use, and the other 100,000 is fully reserved for certain things. So you really, literally, you couldn't open a new restaurant in Concord right now. You could not open a new restaurant. So we'd love to see more restaurants, I agree, but you can't do it right now. So fortunately, MCI is going to relieve that problem, we think. The point I was going to make was around the importance of Concord becoming a more welcoming community for businesses. The reputation among many businesses who try to come to Concord is that we are very hard to work with, that we have a lot of boards, that the permitting process is complex. This is especially true, actually, in the restaurant business. I've heard numerous stories over the years of businesses who've tried to come to Concord and gotten so fed up with the permitting process that they've just left. So we do need to make it easier. We all understand the notion of being welcoming for people, right? We are very welcoming for people, but we need to do better in terms of being welcoming for businesses.
Well, I'm just going to segue right back to you, John. How does MCI and its potential fit into this?
So I should have mentioned, I'm on the MCI Concord Advisory Board, and I happen to be the chair of the Community Outreach Subcommittee. So we are doing our best to make sure that the community understands what's happening over there, and we are doing our best to listen as best we can. And we're actually about a week and a half away from engaging a consulting firm that's going to really allow us to dial up the outreach, the analysis, and that's when we're going to start all the public input process in a more formal sense. So keep your ears open for that. MCI Concord, I never thought I would say that a prison is a beautiful place, but that property is a beautiful opportunity for this town. It's 51 acres in total, including the Junction Village piece. It is a blank slate. We can do anything we want there. There are very few abutters who will be inconvenienced by anything that happens there. Really, the sky is the limit in terms of what we do. And one of the things I think is so beautiful is that because it's such a large parcel, we can do a lot. We've surveyed the community already to get some input on what people would like to see there. And we've had a variety of ideas. Affordable housing is certainly one priority. We'll have plenty of room for affordable housing. Recreation space, 51 acres, we can absolutely build recreation facilities there. We happen to have a lot of frontage along the Aspet River. I mean, that's just a beautiful opportunity right there. In terms of commercial development, retail businesses, there's so much we can do. And so I'm really proud of the way the town has started with this planning. It's going to be a long-term project. We're probably 3 years roughly from even actually kind of beginning to understand, what actual businesses will be coming in. The other two pieces I'll address specifically, one is the wastewater treatment plant. The prison has its own wastewater treatment plant. They are going to convey that to the town of Concord, and that will likely happen during this calendar year. We're in the process right now. Alan Cathcart and the folks at Public Works are kind of doing a lot of work to understand the state of that, the potential. But that will give us roughly $300,000 of additional capacity. 100,000 of that will be 300,000 gallons per day of processing. 100,000 is going to be retained by the state to take care of the prison farm and the state police barracks and that stuff, I guess. 100,000 is going to be available for other town uses, and 100,000 is being notionally reserved for the MCI Concord site development. So that's going to be a very important building block as we seek to redevelop that parcel. And the other important angle here is Route 2. I kind of laugh when I got a memo the other day that said that the Department of Transportation is starting to do its planning for Route 2. I think that's been going on for like 25 years.
Yeah, for sure.
But they are indeed restarting that effort. And so it's important for us to be connected to that process, because that's going to influence, how the MCI Concord site is accessed, in terms of the new traffic scene. So lots of important stuff going on, and it really, I think it's such a gift to the town to have that 51 acres. Plus, Mary's started this separate committee to look at other land that the town is coming into possession of. 2229 Main Street is going to be fully remediated shortly. The land over where Peabody School is, I think it's something like 150 acres total is going to be available. So we are really fortunate to have this opportunity to figure out how to develop that, to do it in a way that's consistent with what this town wants to be. And we really got to do it right. It's really important.
That's great. And just the 300,000 gallons from the water treatment facility there, 100 the state's going to retain. Is that what you said?
The state, I understand, is going to retain 100,000 of that capacity.
And then 100,000 for other stuff in town and 100,000 for the physical footprint, is that?
These are very preliminary numbers, but it's something like that, something like that. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Paul, how does this all fit in? How would an increase in commercial property development impact residential property taxes?
That's a great question.
I know.
So right now, the Finance Committee model is we look out over the next few years and determine at steady service levels, which is an assumption that we all want to make. What is the tax burden on the primary residential property? There's other grants, there's some commercial money that comes in, not as much as we would like, based on the slide that we saw before. But the reality is most of it comes from residential property taxes. So the more that we could offset that, the better it is for everyone. That there's less reliance on residential taxes. There is more opportunity for to question what steady service is, to look at what that service level is and have those conversations, as opposed to looking at it and looking at tax rates as limited of what we could possibly charge people that is affordable, and looking at reducing service level, which no one wants to do. So I did a little math, because I like to do math. I like spreadsheets. And, for every $10 million, and this is based on today's commercial property tax values. So it's just a stake in the road to understand. So for every $10 million of additional assessed value from commercial property, it yields another $123,000. So $50,619,000. Now, that's just, it's hard to imagine what that is in my mind. I don't really know what a $10 million commercial property was. I mean, probably people on this panel would, but I don't. So I looked for some comparisons, and I think, and I'm not suggesting that this is what we want to do, but it is one local community had similar issues and took a look at what they could do to create a commercial property solution that helped them solve some of their tax issues. And I'm speaking specifically to the shops at Maynard Crossing. And like I said, I'm not saying that this is the suggested solution, but I wanted to talk about the numbers associated with what they are planning to yield for tax relief. So pre-development, the site generated $100,000 in annual tax revenue. And in fiscal year 24, that estimate is based $2.23 million that were generated revenue that went into the coffers that offset the need for residential property taxes. And, you know, there's a lot of things there. There's a supermarket, there's restaurants, there's residential, there's a lot of things. And they also had some challenges. You know, they had some challenges associated with water supply, which they worked together to figure that out. And I think the reason why I'm bringing this up is $2.3 million would go a long way. And it would offset quite a bit and create a lot of opportunity to kind of look for ways to not only rely on residential tax structure. And I love the idea of looking at the Finance Committee as not only looking at, you know, how we can afford based on the restrictions of affordability from a property tax standpoint. I love to look at it from hey, how can we grow revenue in other ways? And how can we kind of meet in the middle so that, you know, we all live in a place that we all want to live, so.
Right. I just had a quick, people don't like comparisons to other towns in Concord, but it helps paint the picture. Bedford added $45 million of industrial property tax base last year alone. They did not build a big Amazon warehouse. That, at our tax rate, is the equivalent of over $500,000 of increased revenue, effectively in perpetuity. And we're not Bedford. I'm not saying we're Bedford, but I think it's just helpful to understand the scale of some of this tax base creation that is available and out there if embraced the right way.
Great. Any other comments on that question? Well, I have another question I'd like to ask everybody. We kind of have touched on it, but I'd like to see if we could put a point on it. What's the one misconception people have about development in Concord, do you think?
Paul. That it's always a bad thing, you know? I think that it can be a good thing. And it could be fitting, and I love the comments that were made at this table already of, you know, if we do it in the right way, it could represent, you know, what we want to be in a place where we want to live. So, you know, I think looking at it in the right lens and making good choices is a good thing to do.
Quentin?
Yeah, just to build on that, I actually think at a high level, we don't really have a lack of consensus. I bet if I said that we wanted walkable, moderate density, good services, maintaining the character, most people would nod their heads. Not all, but most. I do think that the implementation is the challenge, and I think it manifests itself in a couple ways. The first is the attitude. Development, and often rightfully so, is often met with defense. What precedent are we worried about setting or upsetting? How can this hurt us? And the reality is that if we instead move, once we know what we want, into a more proactive attitude of how can we make this good project happen? How can we be flexible? How can we embrace this? It's more likely to be happen now in our lifetimes for something that we can enjoy. And the second is a structural issue, which is establishing consistency. So town governance relies on a staff that provides an anchor for us over a long period of time, and they do great work here in Concord, but the approvals go through volunteer-led boards. And the approvals are not the fault of any one person or any one project, it's just the way it is. They're staggered, so there's some continuity, but I think what we need to do is when we have this set of priority, and whether that's in Vision 2030 or something new, is to try to ingrain that culture in the charge of these boards and the way that they act so that people can feel like every time they're coming on to a board that they don't have to be worried about just precedent, but more the goal and being flexible. And I think that those two things are going to be really important to making sure that this happens.
Thank you. John?
I want to piggyback on that last point. I do think that when we've talked about, I talked earlier about the challenges around permitting. Too often, I think the boards, step back, we're nostalgic. We love this community. We love our history. We love the way it's always been, right? We want to retain all that. And I think too often our board's starting position is no, as opposed to how do we get to yes, right? And I think that that's a really important mind shift that we need to have in this community. And we can sit here and pretend that we have an option about whether to do more commercial development or not. We really don't. If we're going to continue to have the same level of services we have now, you talked about level services, there's really no way to avoid commercial development unless we're going to be satisfied with residential tax rates continuing to rise. And I just don't think there's patience for that. And I got to say, pre-COVID, Jen, you might be able to speak to this. Pre-COVID, there was a sense among the merchants that the town didn't really support them, that they were kind of taken for granted. Concord Center was this jewel, and if you asked people why did they move to Concord, it was usually the schools, the character, and the town center. Something happened during COVID, and the town got much more supportive of its businesses. And I feel like we're coming upon a period where people are going to be supportive of the whole idea, the need for commercial development. And when I think about MCI Concord, I've got this, I don't know if you know that term, BHAG, one of the business writers, it's called a big, hairy, audacious goal. It's often unachievable, but it's something that's fun to aim for. A BHAG I have for MCI Concord and the other new parcels that we'll have the opportunity to redevelop is that it would be tax neutral to positive. Like, I'd like to be able to do all these things and at the end of the day have residential taxes go down. Now, go down may be too much to ask, but let's not have them go up. Let's see if we can't come up with a formula for development that allows the new commercial tax revenue to fund not only the additional service that those new properties require, but also can help us absorb some of the other budget increases that are going to come as we seek to build a new public safety building, put $25 million into the wastewater treatment plant. We got a bunch of capital expenses on the horizon, and really commercial development is the only viable way to afford it.
Seems like a spreadsheet needs to be put together.
Well, you'll be glad to know that the consultant that MCI Concord hires is going to actually do an economic analysis of a variety of different scenarios for us to answer just this question.
Yeah, I think that, to me, that is what's possible and how much can it actually matter, I think is really critical. Did you want to comment on obstacles?
I can comment on the question.
Please, please.
So a couple things. I think, John, on your comment, I've been open, it'll be 8 years in March. So I was only open like 2 years before COVID hit. So I didn't know the business community behind the scenes as well. But I will say definitely before COVID, the vibe that I got and in observation is that, yes, Concord Center, that was where it was, and nobody else really cared about that. The town didn't. But I will say absolutely since COVID, I would say in the town, all the town offices, in the Chamber of Commerce, having Mimi here, there is absolutely, it's not a fight for it. It's like, how do we figure out how we can make it even better? So that's my observation. When you had asked what one of the challenges is, or misconceived, something that's not a challenge?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what you had said.
Misconceptions people have.
Misconception. So I obviously don't have the commercial real estate background that these gentlemen have, but I would say there has been a feeling that I've observed maybe a few years ago that if you have more commercial development, the town will lose its character. It will not look as nice, it will not be as warm, it will not be as, will lose the history. I think that's a misconception. I think there are plenty of ways that you can bring more commercial businesses into town and still absolutely keep the quaint feel, even of West Concord. It has to do, I think, with architecture and where you put things, but I don't think that's a problem. I think there feels like there's room for me.
Great. John, sure.
So much to talk about, but I think people are generally afraid of change. Most people don't like change. When something's good, let's keep it the way it is. When Joanna and I got involved with the Bradford Mill in West Concord, that was 2010. And we had a choice to raise it and build something new or renovate it. And we opted to renovate it. Even then, the West Concord Task Force had just come into existence. There were a lot of people in that group who were very unhappy that we were going to renovate that building. The fact of the matter is, if you didn't renovate it, it was going to fall down. It was already a fire trap. There were no sprinklers. I mean, it was a terrifying place to work. There was actually, it was about 30% occupied when we bought it. There was an office on the third floor, and literally each, it was a large open space, and there were probably 10 desks, each in front of one of the windows. Each person had their own fire ladder under their desk, so they could exit the building really fast, because those are wooden buildings. If they started fire, they were going to be gone in an instant. I look at what's happened since 2010 in West Concord, and I would guess that more than 50% of the commercial real estate in Concord is new uses. We didn't have Woods Hill Table. Were we sad to see the West Concord supermarket close? Absolutely. But Woods Hill Table is a pretty good successor. We didn't have Deborah's in its new expanded format. We didn't have Saltbox Kitchen. We didn't have the Glasses Store. We didn't have a bunch of other businesses on Commonwealth Avenue. So I think a lot of people would say that West Concord today is even more vibrant, more walkable, more useful than it was 15 years ago. And that shows that if it's done thoughtfully and the right people are doing it, it can really be a positive. And I'm going to make one plug for the Concord Business Partnership, of which I'm a member. But the partnership consists of almost all the owners of commercial real estate in town. And when you think about all those shops in Concord and West Concord and commercial buildings, many of those, fortunately, are owned by Concordians or people from our own community who care deeply about contributing and creating something that is valuable and appreciated. And so I think it's really important that as we move to this next phase of development in town, a lot of those folks are going to be participating in this. And we are far better off having people from our own community involved than bringing in people from outside, because people in the community have to talk to their neighbors. And if they're doing something that the neighbors that they don't like, they don't want to do that, right? So I think we have an opportunity to really do some good things. And I just want to say thank you. I see several commercial property owners in the room, so thank you guys for all that you do.
Paul?
Yeah, I'm just going to put a plug out for the volunteers, because I'm a volunteer. I sit on a board that I choose to sit on, because I want to be civic-minded and I want to help the community I live in. And I know that there are a lot of other people on the boards, on the committees, that do the same thing. And I believe that also, we can all work together to go in the right direction and kind of keep the feeling that our town has and maintain it, using the, I don't know, civic architecture, if that's a concept, that exists. So, a lot of negotiation, a lot of people voicing their opinions, a lot of meeting of the minds, moving in one direction. So I don't necessarily think that we have to drastically change the way we're organized in order to also facilitate some of this development.
Well, I think we don't need to worry about Concordians expressing their opinion. I think that will we'll for sure get that. Let me open it to questions from the audience. Mimi, could you be our mic lady? And so in the back. Oh, it's our first questioner. And please tell us your name and your address.
Sven Weber, 50 Bellen Up. I'm chair of Public Works, but speaking on my own behalf. So two things. One, I just want to clarify the wastewater capacity issue. So we have a permit of 1.1 million. We are running already 100,000 gallons above that. So if you're getting 300,000 from MCI, 100,000 goes for the state, 100,000 for the MCI. The 100,000 for the rest of the town is already spoken for. So I can only encourage in all the negotiations with the state that we need not to have 1.1 million plus 300,000 as a permit, but 2 million as a complete permit. We have to shoot high. Otherwise, we can have all kind of nice plans. It's not leading anywhere. So that is crucial. Second, again, also not related to this, but to commercial development, I think we should think bigger. Yeah, if we want to have, let's say, 20-25% of the tax base from commercial side, that means is roughly $15 million of revenue for the town. We have to think, okay, if we want to achieve that, what kind of tax density, what kind of commercial density, what kind of business is generating $15 million for the town? Because that is, to your point, John, is kind of, if commercial development should eat the, say, our cost increase, well, it's easy. It's like if we have 6-8% cost increase per year, in 3 years, you are at 20%. So you have to think about 15 million or more, and how do we get there? And what kind of business is generating this amount of tax revenue?
Thank you. Any of the panelists want to comment on that? Okay, thank you. Other questions? Yes.
Janet Miller, 1647 Main Street. I'm a member of the Climate Action Committee, but what I have to say is nothing to, well, very little to do with climate. The one topic that hasn't been mentioned is traffic. An increase in commercial development will increase traffic. Most people who work in the town of Concord sadly cannot afford to live in the town of Concord. So having maybe some relatively low-income housing at the MCI Concord site might help. The dealing with the rotary on Route 2 will help a little bit, but the traffic still stalls further up the road. I find from going to West Concord to Concord Center, especially early in the morning, there's a lot of traffic. So do you have any suggestions how this could be dealt with?
Don't all talk at once.
Traffic is really difficult. The Route 2 realignment of the rotary is absolutely critical. It sounds like it's going to happen. The studies have commenced now after 20 years. But the mixed use nature, I mean, it's easy to say, but it does help. How much it helps is hard to measure. But if we can have employment and reduce trips and increase kind of local mobility, then that helps. Reducing vehicle trips helps. It's not all about every new development brings one-for-one new traffic trips. We can think about that. I also think we can think about our mobility. Obviously, we've had lots of studies. We have a great rail trail. The Bruce Freeman Rail Trail is amazing. It doesn't really go anywhere in Concord. It goes through West Concord. It helps a few people along the rail trail, but it doesn't work. It's like, I could imagine a world someday, somehow, I don't know where, but where we have mobility between the three centers of Concord, which would be a total game changer, allowing people to move without getting in the car to go between Walden and Thoreau and then West Concord. So it's a challenge for sure.
Thank you. Other question?
Yes,
Oh,
I
I'm
could
sorry,
just comment,
Jen.
yeah, no. That was a really interesting question with the traffic, because I didn't mention that earlier. So if you know where my store is, I'm on Com Ave, I'm the bookend with Concord Tea Cakes, and I will tell you, I cannot even tell you how many cars are damaged right in front of my store, because it is so narrow. And with more traffic, I mean, it could get worse. I know people have come in talking to me like, oh, it'd be so great if we had a bike lane going through. I'm like, there's not enough room for the trucks and cars going through there now. Yeah. So I do think it's important to consider, but I don't know, I don't think you're gonna put a bike lane on Com Ave where our stores are.
Unless you got rid of parking on one side of the street.
Well, then you lose.
Yeah, and then you
Because we already
parking.
lost parking when they redid the road down by Salt Box. We lost a number of spots there. We lost a spot or two in front of Tea Cakes. And then when they made, in between Tea Cakes and the fish market, that used to have a bunch of parking when they made that a plaza. I don't know how it impacts me because I wasn't there. So, you know, my business is fine. But taking more spots away wouldn't help.
Thank you, Jen. Mark, you're going to go to Mark? Thanks.
Sure, Mark Howell, member of the Select Board. Just a couple of thoughts that I'd love your reaction to is on the trips. It strikes me that one of the options might be to think in terms of commercial development that addresses needs that cause Concordians to leave Concord today for, you know, whatever services those might be. The other one I wonder whether you might have any comments on. It's my perception that particularly the Baker Avenue Commercial District has sort of struggled with occupancy. And, you know, so it causes me to wonder, are we somehow misaligned with the regional needs? And how do we think about those sorts of issues in terms of what is the development that meets, you know, gaps in our current service profile as a community that might make us more attractive for other residents as well as working things. And as long as I'm talking while you think about those answers, I'll just mention that we did have an extremely productive meeting this week with Department of Transportation representatives, and the opportunity, they recognize the opportunity of the MCI Concord property as being an opportunity to look at new designs. They are going to dust off the old designs and start with whether they work, but also update that for new information about the traffic patterns that have changed, as well as what other solutions there might be. And it occurs to me that we have an MBTA station, we have the rail trail, we have a place where the high-speed traffic from the region slows down, and so does that become a destination opportunity where a set of commercial development in association with redevelopment of that property becomes attractive as a regional commerce center? So just reactions to any of those 3 points.
I have a couple of quick ones. One is I do think that the reduced trips is a real thing if we find the right services. It's going to be hard to measure, but it's there. I also wonder if the Route 2 alignment will cause some traffic that routes through Concord to be removed now. People that are choosing 62 instead of Route 2 just to get through to dodge 1 or 2 extra lights. I think that will help. I also think we need to negotiate with the MBTA to not get a train to cross right after each other in West Concord nearly every hour and stop the whole downtown for up to 20 minutes. It's really a gridlock, and it makes, even though the flow doesn't change, it makes it feel like heavy traffic in town because it stops and then it releases. Baker Avenue, just a comment from the commercial real estate world, COVID hit that type of space at the wrong time. There's a lot of what we would call sort of generic Class B office space that's available there. And I think Baker Avenue is an opportunity to, over time, continue to, and I'm not commenting on the 40B project, but more just on the amount of parking and land that's there relative to office footprint and how the office needs have evolved. I mean, this is 80s built, low clear, low light office that is just frankly not that desirable to companies. And so there's a reason that there's some vacancy there. And it doesn't have that many amenities besides the little quick serves that are in each building. And so I think over time that may need to be worked out and redeveloped under some of these same principles.
John?
Yeah, I think the comment about Baker Ave is a good one. I mean, we don't want to kind of create uses that aren't going to be well received, right? But here I think the market is a beautiful thing. And I think that as part of the MCI Concord process, we should, we will no doubt think about what kind of development we would like to see, what some of the parameters are, right? So we know there are certain things that we're open to, there are certain things that we won't want to have. But then I think we should really open it up to proposals from developers. And we will get a sense as to what works, because if the properties are developed by investors who are putting their own money up to make it happen, they have a much better chance of succeeding than if we as a town try to dictate what the uses need to be. So I think we need to understand kind of the spectrum of what we would find acceptable, seek proposals, and we'll learn a lot from those.
Right. Stefan, I think, was next.
Thank you. I've got a half a dozen. I'll try to keep it.
Name and address, Stefan.
Pardon?
Name and address.
Oh, Stefan Bader, 7 River Street. Bunch of things on my mind. I'll try to be short and to the point. Jennifer, my daughter who lives in Boston comes out to Concord to shop in your shop. So just to let you know, there are people from out of town shopping there as well. I'm all for getting to yes, John. I think that's the way we should approach a lot of issues in the town. The question is, how do we get there? In all the positivity, I just want to throw out 2 caveats. The first one is, you mentioned the Maynard crossing, and I think it's truly incumbent upon us to make absolutely sure that in building a new town center, we don't neutron bomb West Concord. Middlesex Banks moved to the new shopping center, the paper store moved, downtown Maynard is not the same as it was before. It's getting some new businesses, it's reviving somewhat, but we don't want to have to go through that pain with West Concord. The other question, more for the real estate and tax experts, the shift to the commercial real estate as a revenue base makes a lot of sense. My caveat is, or my question is, how often will we see economic cycles where commercial real estate, which is valued differently than residential, will take a bigger hit, and if we come to depend on it more, we'll have a greater impact on the overall town finances. And I give you as an example, Boston, what Mayor Wu is trying to do to balance the fact that the commercial and the residential real estate are in non-synchronous cycles right now. Thank you.
Comments?
I'll just say good comments.
I can't predict the future. I wish I could. That'd be really a great skill. But what I would like to say is something, or a portion of something is better than a portion of nothing. And, there will be a cycle for both, for any kind of property value. But as a town, we could rely on a portion of that commercial property tax revenue, and it would offset the need for other sources. So like, why wouldn't we want to try to find a way that would fit the town, in the feel of the town, that would lessen the requirement to ask for it in our real estate taxes, so.
Thank you.
Just great comments. We shouldn't build too much of one thing. We should have a mix of uses. We should diversify. We should embrace. We should make sure the stuff is beautiful that is built and that it has high quality amenities and it's in a good environment. And those are the properties that do well. Hopefully we don't end up with a bunch of office towers that become obsolete. So I think a mix is helpful.
Thank you. Do you have a question? Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Thank you definitely for those comments. Thank you. Tellers, thank you for coming to the store. That's a really interesting thing that you said about how West Concord could basically disappear, its importance. And I've thought about that. And in many ways, I actually think it's exciting. I'm like, oh my God, this could bring more people. But I think what's going to matter is what is in both locations. I think to keep West Concord relevant, I think it's going to have to stay very unique. And I would say, here I'm saying this with no idea what these things cost, is I would think that it would be smart to make an investment to make West Concord look even more quaint, like Concord Center. Is this unrealistic? Probably. But if you get the quaint little, get the streets with looking cobblestoney and this and that, I think if you make it, right, I just kind of feel that it could happen. Both things could happen, but I think there is absolutely a place for West Concord and a place where West Concord could thrive with MCI being developed in multi-use, et cetera. One thing I had an idea is how we could increase the value of the Baker Ave stuff is let's get a link somehow from those to West Concord, because then everybody could buy their lunch, get their coffee, get a little gift, and then that would just raise the prices.
That's the Assabet Bridge that we're talking about,
But
right?
it hasn't happened, right?
But it will happen.
I'm being a little silly with that.
Yeah,
I mean, it would.
yeah, that's important.
We get people from there, but I see them walking, say, from my store all the way down past the strip mall and then around and walking up Baker Ave, but anyway.
Yeah.
Could work.
I think that gentleman sitting by Tiffany was next. No, not Mr. Lauren, but there, yeah.
Hi, my name is Peter Nelson, 52 Cottage. Peter Nelson, 52 Cottage Lane, over by Sorrento's Pizza and et cetera. My question is, maybe it's a comment, I don't know, but the slide there says, what does commercial development mean for Concord? And I think the title should also be subtitled, what does infrastructure have to do with that? Because we're not going to have any development that doesn't require some amount of infrastructure development. And that's always left off the agenda. And that's kind of my comment or my question, because that's a huge, huge piece of that puzzle, of the development piece. So that's my comment or question.
Great, thank you. Mr. Lauren has hand up.
Hi, I'm Joe Lauren, Southfield Road. I'm curious about the town's experience in the development that happened a few years ago in West Concord. I don't know the official name for it, but it's sort of one layer behind Saltbox and Deborah's. It's all new construction. And it seems to me that, it's obviously not, the architecture is not in keeping with the rest of the town. But since it's one layer back, it, I think, might be acceptable to folks. And I'm wondering if that is true, what the experience is with that development, both aesthetically as well as how much it has brought in as far as housing and commercial space and the impact then on revenue for the town.
John, you're the guy.
Everyone's chuckling. So my brother and my father developed that property in partnership with another company. I have nothing to do with it, but I've watched as they've done it. And I will tell you that commercially, it's been a real success. So it's fully leased, and they've got a long wait list of people waiting to move in there. So in that regard, it's worked. I can't really comment on the kind of the design aesthetics of it. I do know that when around 2010, the town of Concord the planning department came out with a kind of a design guide for West Concord. And it was kind of humorous because it attempted to describe concisely the design aesthetic along Commonwealth Avenue. And it said, well, you know, a lot of the stores have glass fronts, and many of the doors are different, the designs. And it was all these kind of, this attempt to try to standardize, but the conclusion was it's an eccentric design environment. There is no consistency, and that's what makes it great. So personally, I don't love the look of that either, and I'm grateful that it's a block off. But from a housing standpoint, it's been very well received, and I think we need more housing like that.
Those are rental units, aren't they, John? Is that correct? They're rental units?
They are rentals, yes.
Other questions? Yes, please.
Hi, Zortius, 29 Lexington Road and 48 Grove Street, a couple of things. So as I think about the MCI property, I start to think about how it could serve the community. And we have a lot of needs there, but how could it serve the community from a broader sense? And I think about what the pedigree of our community is. You know, we're known for our art background, architecture, history, and so on and so forth. I think about the seaport, when the seaport was barren land, you know, and really a unique opportunity for development. You know, they actually anchored it with the Contemporary Design Museum. They actually said, okay, our anchor for the community, our town, is going to be a museum that could have rotating exhibits, that could have some certainly not only national attention, but could have, you know, state attention. That location is a unique location because we don't have to go through any of our town centers to get there, and there's some development there of obviously Route 2. I think there's a thoughtful way to think about it as an entire campus, and the thing that we can do is impact the architecture of the entirety. What are the needs? What are we going to do? Is there going to be a new police station there? Is there going to be, you know, housing there? But think about it as one piece of architecture and try to impact an anchor or create an anchor for that architecture and for all those town needs that we're all trying to say what we could do there. But anchor it in something like that, a museum. Something that can bring state attention, that would get people there in a rotating basis to support stores like Jen's store and to support the local restaurants and the people that are already invested in our community. And if we can think about it from that perspective, maybe we can then think about how do you create walkability in that environment. And so, you know, I think about terrific parks that create walkability. You know, they might have horseshoes, they might have, I think about the Brooklyn waterfront where they simply put a merry-go-round there, where you think about urban sprinklers where kids can play, seating areas where people can read and so on and so forth, but still build ground floor retail around that as one piece of architecture. Still build housing above it and create some density there. So it becomes its own unique center that then connects, that creates activity. And I think a museum would be in line with our community. I think it would be easy to get community support. It could get some state attention. It could be a national story of what we did with this unique opportunity. And we could build all these things around it. You know, you think about Central Park in New York City, or some of the parks that have been built in Boston proper. You know, they've been thoughtfully executed for walkability to create interactive experiences, and you mix that with retail, and then the whole thing is one architectural campus. So we can impact, and I'll finish up with this, but we can certainly control the design theory of the entire thing as one campus, immaterial of who the investors are and what we're trying to cram into that space. We can think about being committed to a central act. You know, I think about the Maynard crossing. That doesn't excite me too much. ICA, you know, the museum excites me quite a bit. And then we're talking, you know, we coined this term cultural centers around our centers. You know, but are we really a cultural center? It's almost hard to say it, West Concord Cultural District or whatever we branded that. In my real estate experience, I just call it the West End now because it sounds, to me, more appealing, right? So I've rebranded it the West End myself, and I'm hoping it sticks, right? So I just want to think about it from that perspective. Every great shopping center, shopping experience has a great anchor. Why don't we focus on the anchor piece and have it be something that contributes to our education and our community and the arts and so on and so forth, and then build around that as one movement. So that's just some feedback of something I've been thinking about as I thought about shopping centers and all these other things that people are going to, you know, or whatever else is.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah. Other questions? Greg?
Hi, Greg Higgins, Cottage Lane. My question has to do with a lot of what's been discussed and how it leans on one another. We have 20,000 people in the town, and we've had, well, it's 18.3 or something, but let's hope we get a few more. What's the impact of that on our retail? Do we have a population that will support, I'm talking retail now, and couple that with how I'd like to divide the conversation from development to redevelopment. I mean, I'm thinking Deborah's is redeveloping, whereas maybe the hotel that went over off Baker 1050, that's development. And it seems to me, if we're trying to raise the 25% as our chair of our DPW in commercial, we're going to have to do it through the development side, not the redevelopment side. I'm not positive of that, but it just seems intuitively that 18.3 will not support a heck of a lot more business. I don't know how the restaurants are doing, but I hear varying degrees of success there, and some of them aren't doing as well as people might think.
Right. Any comments? John?
I think your distinction of redevelopment versus development, these parcels are all about new development. So I think you're right about that. And I think you're asking whether our small population will be enough to support whatever we might build. And to Zer's comments, I think we're trying to find, I mean, that's a great vision. And I think we're as a committee, again, we're advisory, so we're recommending to the select board what we ought to do. But we'd like to figure out what the optimal mix of uses is. And Greg, to your point, I think that if we're really going to build a lot of stuff, we're going to need more than the people of Concord to support it. That's why the transportation is so important, the accessibility is going to be so important.
John?
So that's a really good point too, but what I can tell you is when I first opened, I just assumed, it was my first retail venture, that it would be mostly Concord. But I don't know exactly what the other folks are, but I can tell you, I'm probably about 70% Concord, but I pull a ton of people from Acton, Maynard, Westford maybe not, Littleton. I have a lot coming from Harvard and Stowe. So for me, as I've been trying to grow my business, there's a couple ways you can grow it. You can increase how much they buy when they're there, increase the number of times the same person comes in, or find more people. So I feel that can be the hardest part, is bringing more people. But if we build something somewhat like maybe what Zora was saying, or something that anchors what everybody's talking about, that makes you really want to come here. And if we keep, obviously Concord Center will always be the special, and there's the history to take you there. But with West Concord, keeping it unique, but maybe a little more, I don't know, maybe slightly bit more polished. That includes my store too, could be more polished. But I think there's an opportunity. You don't have to rely solely on the number of people that live in Concord to build it. But I think it does have to be thoughtful So how we do it, but I just thought I'd share where I have business. I'm surprised how much business I have that comes out of Concord.
Great, thank you. Are there other questions? Mark?
Mark Martinez, Alfred Circle. I sit on the EVC, but do not speak for the EVC tonight. Paul's spreadsheets, I love. Question is, and I don't know if this is something you know or if this is homework, but I think the town manager recently announced that the town is looking at $370 million worth of capital spending. And I don't think that that was included in FinCom's estimate, which was the scary estimate of, taxes could go up 8% for the next 6 years. I have another question too.
I mean, so the information that was passed at the last town meeting, I think is what you're referring to?
No, I'm talking about the fact that I think Carrie LaFleur announced that the town finally has gotten around to a 10-year capital plan. So this is new DPW, fire, and that by itself, which I don't think anyone has really modeled at all, looks like $370 million for the next 10 years. So my question is, when we talk about potentially bad news, that is the bad news of 8% for 6 years, it could be actually a little bit higher than that.
I mean, I think that's a moving target associated with how we look at both, annual versus capital spending. And I think it's a misconception that FinCom isn't aware of the capital spending, but the estimate is a moving target. And I think we continually negotiate with the town, and I think that's kind of the FinCom job, is to continually negotiate with the town, negotiate with the schools, kind of represent the populace, and find the medium that we can vote on at town meeting. So, and, I make, I do financial modeling for a living, and the first thing I tell people is when I do my financial model, it's wrong immediately. But I can improve upon it, and we can talk about it, and we work from those numbers that we have. And you can make informed decisions based on those numbers, which are a lot better than if you weren't informed. So, I don't know, that doesn't answer your question directly, but I think it speaks in that line.
Yeah, well, it wasn't a criticism. It was just, I think, pointing out that when we look at the 10-year plan, I think the bills could be bigger than we previously thought.
Absolutely.
Okay. And then secondly, my understanding is that we're currently, or will be at over 16% of affordable housing after the second 40B. And so has FinCom looked at any analysis to understand what the break point is? Meaning, if we assume a family of 4 in a housing unit will serve that family of 4, what the income, what the tax generation revenue needs to be, and what assessment we're talking about. My point being that if we're at 16.2, 60% above the 10% limit, if we start building a lot of affordable housing, we haven't even talked about the MBTA overlay, by the way. But has the FinCom, or does the FinCom, because I've heard that there have been, sort of numbers thrown around as to, what I've heard is that for every housing unit under $1.3 million, the services, the cost of services of that home actually is not paid for by the assessment and taxes of that home. So if that's homework, it's fine. But I think it's a point, particularly if we're pushing affordable housing and we're way over the limit.
I think that's a great bit of homework to bring back to the FinCom, and I'm more than willing to bring that perspective. I think I can speak in granular terms right now, which, added homes require more services than added commercial. So, and it is a continuous kind of calculus of figuring out what that is. And the reality is the average home isn't average. There's a lot of different things associated with it that everybody, that makes up our community has different needs and uses the services in different ways. And, we create guidelines to let the professionals, that run those services kind of figure out how best to meet that need. So, I'll take that back as feedback and, go from there.
Last question. John, I think the town has come up with a land use matrix. And when we talk about, I think this is what I've heard is that Kaiser Road's not large enough to house the new DPW. And so I think my understanding, this could be wrong, is my understanding is that Junction Village has a deed restriction for affordable housing.
Yes.
So is there sort of a coordination that maybe you trade, Junction Village for Kaiser Road, you trade something else, and sort of, I guess my concern is making sure that this conversation, specifically development, fits with the municipal development needs and making sure that we optimize all of that, where may not want, a fire station, at MCI. But just a footnote.
Yeah, I think it's, again, the MCI Concord Committee is charged with looking at that particular parcel. The new committee the Select Board is forming to look at the kind of other properties coming online. We'll look at the whole thing. Mary, you're welcome to answer if you want, but my assumption is that at some point, all that stuff will be looked across in its totality to optimize, but I'm not sure. I mean, I think in terms of like the limitation on what can be done with that Junction Village piece, the easement or whatever it's called, I think that requires like state legislation to change. But I think that if we come forward, if we look across all those parcels and we figure out some way to trade one location for another,
Yes.
theoretically that could be done.
Yes. Yes. One of the things with the land use matrix that we're developing would be looking at domino effects. So, for example, if we were to decide that DPW should go to MCI Concord, I'm not advocating that. I'm just saying if that was something that we wanted to look at, what does that free up on Kaiser Road? What could we put at Kaiser Road? Or if, for example, we move public safety there, what does that free up as far as public safety? And we've got a lot of other pieces of land besides just MCI and 2229 Main Street that are in this mix. So it's a complex thing, but we're trying to get our arms around it with the matrix.
Thank you. Keith, did you want to say something?
Keith Bergman, 56 White Ave, Chair of the Concord Municipal Affordable Housing Trust. Just on the housing question that came up, first off, the 16.2% that we will reach if the second 40B, if the thorough 40B is approved, that would mean 16% of the entire housing stock is listed on the subsidized housing inventory. It does not mean that 16% are affordable. In fact, the figure that's affordable is 7.2%. I didn't see that in the Concord Bridge story that I spent a lot of time talking about. But if there was one number that I would have liked to have seen was 7.2. That is the percentage of affordable housing units that Concord would have if this second 40B gets approved. So to the extent if there's a concern that affordable housing doesn't pay enough taxes, we'll be rest assured that most of those 60% of the units that are listed on the SHI will be market rate.
Thank you. So I want to thank John, Paul, Quentin, and Jen very much. I greatly appreciate your being on the panel. So we have a once-in-a-generation challenge and opportunity here, and I think if we can continue to talk with one another and make our views known and work hard, this can really be cool. So thank you all very much for coming. Good night.